The last light of the day bled across the New Mexico mesa, a streak of copper and fire that set the desert aglow. Dry wind whispered over the rocks, carrying the sharp scent of mesquite and the faint metallic tang of gun oil. A lone hawk circled high above the rim, its cry cutting through the stillness like a warning. Far below, a canyon lay hidden in gathering dusk, where a fire cracked and spat amber sparks into the cooling air. Around that fire crouched the Black Knoll gang, 7 men whose names rode ahead of them like dust storms, Boone with his wolfish grin and restless trigger finger, Fitch with a scar that split his lip into a permanent sneer, and the others whose eyes gleamed as fiercely as the coins they spilled from a battered canvas sack. Gold glinted in the firelight, a fortune stripped from a stagecoach before noon, and now, under the rising moon, greed hissed like a rattler between them. "You counted wrong," Boone snapped, his voice slicing through the night. He jabbed a finger toward the pile. "That's short. I know it." Fitch leaned back on his elbows, the firelight carving deep lines in his weathered face. "You calling me a thief, boy? After the blood I shed to get us here?" "I'm calling you blind," Boone shot back. "Or worse." The others shifted, hands brushing the butts of their pistols. The gold might have bought a lifetime of whiskey and women, but it could also buy a bullet before sunrise. The crackle of the fire seemed to grow louder with each heated breath. A distant coyote yipped, breaking the tension for an instant. Boone's grin returned, sharp and hungry. "We need a place to lay low before the army comes sniffing. Some quiet ranch where no one asks questions." "Plenty of those," Fitch muttered. "Pick one and keep your mouth shut." As the argument twisted on, the mesa above darkened, and the first stars pricked through the velvet sky. Down in the valley, a single lantern glowed against the vast dark. Caleb Stroud moved beneath its soft halo, steady as the clockwork of the frontier night. He hauled water from the well, the rope rasping like an old hymn, and fed the horses with a quiet hand. The day's dust clung to his shoulders and streaked the brim of his hat, but his movements were deliberate, almost reverent. He was a man who knew the worth of silence. Once, long ago, his name had thundered through battlefields, but he had long since buried that life beneath the endless sky. Now he was simply a widowed rancher with weathered skin and eyes the color of storm clouds, a man who spoke to his mare more than to his neighbors and who found comfort in the rhythm of chores and the sigh of the desert wind. The night carried faint echoes, laughter, sharp and mean, rolling from the canyon like a warning that did not reach his ears. He paused only once, gaze lifted to the orange edge of the moon, and listened. The wind teased the grass, nothing more. He set the lantern by the corral and leaned on the fence, letting the quiet seep into his bones. Back in the canyon, tempers flared anew. One outlaw kicked the canvas sack, sending coins scattering over the sand. Sparks flew from the fire as if the gold itself spat defiance. "We ain't splitting it 7 ways," Boone said, his voice a low growl. "Too then. I say we ride north, leave the dead weight behind." "You mean leave me behind," Fitch answered, his hand sliding toward the holster at his hip. Another outlaw, Reed, broad-shouldered and tired of the bickering, stepped between them. "Enough. We lay low, spend a night off the trail. I passed a lonely spread south of here. Lights in the window, small place, no neighbors for miles." Boone's eyes gleamed. "Perfect. We take what we need, maybe have some fun with the owner." Fitch spat into the dust. "Long as we leave before sunup. The army'll be on us come daylight." Boone laughed, a sound that echoed against the canyon walls and made the horses shy. "Sunup's when we'll ride. Maybe the man's got whiskey. Maybe he's got nothing but a heartbeat and fear." They doused the fire, one by one, until the canyon swallowed them in darkness. The moon painted their silhouettes in cold silver as they mounted up, restless and reckless, the night stretching wide before them. In the valley, Caleb moved through the quiet with the patience of a man who trusted the stars. He closed the barn door, the hinge creaking like an old memory, and brushed a hand over the mare's neck. The horse whickered softly, sensing something in the distance that he could not yet hear. He murmured a wordless reassurance, though his own senses sharpened, the way they had years ago when enemy scouts crept through midnight grass. He fetched the lantern and started toward the house. Behind him, the mesa loomed dark and watchful. A breeze stirred, carrying with it a faint scent of smoke and something sharper, gunpowder, maybe, or the restless omen of men with violence in their hearts. Caleb paused at his door, eyes narrowing to the horizon. A single star winked out as a thin cloud passed, and for an instant he felt the old tingle along his spine, the one that once told him when to raise a rifle before the enemy struck. He stayed there, listening to the land, until the chill finally nudged him inside. Far off, the Black Knoll gang urged their horses across the ridge, hooves muffled by sand and screv. Boone rode at the front, eyes bright with thoughts of easy plunder, the taste of stolen gold already fading into hunger for more. Behind him, Fitch muttered curses, and the others followed, bound together by greed and the restless need to prove they feared no man. The desert night deepened, moonlight silvering the mesas and painting long shadows across the valley floor. Coyotes yipped again, but no one answered. Only the wind carried a single truth across the empty miles. Some men made noise when they rode. Caleb Stroud was not one of them. Inside his modest house, the lamp's glow traced the edges of a framed photograph on the mantel, a woman's gentle smile, a memory of a life lost to fever and frontier hardship. Caleb touched the frame with a calloused hand, then settled into the worn chair by the window. He laid his rifle across his knees, not out of fear but from habit, the metal cool and familiar against his palm. Outside, the stars wheeled slowly, and the night held its breath. Somewhere beyond the black line of the ridge, 7 riders plotted a dawn passage through his valley, their minds full of gold and violence, their hearts blind to the legend that waited in silence. The wind shifted again, carrying the faintest tremor of approaching fate. Moonlight poured over the canyon like spilled milk, pale and cold, sharpening every edge of rock and brush. The Black Knoll gang huddled close to their dying fire, voices low and ragged from whiskey. Boone, the youngest, paced like a caged wolf, boots crunching on the hard sand. His eyes gleamed with the restless fury of a man who had never learned patience. "We split it wrong," he growled, kicking at a loose stone. "I know you're holding back, Fitch." Fitch, broad and scar-scored, didn't bother to rise. He lounged against a saddle roll, the shadow of his head hiding his sneer. "You talk too much for a boy who hasn't even grown a proper beard." The others shifted uneasily. Gold coins winked in the embers, a treasure that bound them as tightly as it threatened to break them apart. Boone's fingers twitched toward his revolver. The dry night air seemed to vibrate. "Call me boy again," Boone said, his voice low as a snake's rattle. Fitch spat into the dust and smiled. "Boy." The gunshot cracked the sky wide open. Boone's pistol flashed, sending a bullet straight into the stars. The sound rolled off the canyon walls and thundered across the mesa, scattering a roost of night birds. Horses shied and snorted, eyes rolling white. The gang leapt to their feet, curses flying like sparks. "Are you mad?" Reed barked, gripping Boone's arm. "You'll bring every lawman from Santa Fe." Boone wrenched free, chest heaving. "Let 'em come. I'm tired of hiding like a rat." "Then you'll die like one," Fitch said, voice edged with ice. Before fists could fly, another outlaw pointed to the southern horizon where a faint lantern glimmered against the vast darkness. "Look there," he said, eyes narrowing. "A ranch. Small. Isolated." Boone's grin returned, sharp and mean. "Supplies. Maybe a little fun." The others hesitated only a moment before greed and liquor drowned caution. They doused the fire and mounted up, the echo of Boone's shot still hanging in the air. Asterisk. Down in the valley, Caleb Stroud stood at the water trough, lantern swinging from a hook. The night had a strange weight, the kind that presses on a man's shoulders and whispers of change. He knelt, fingers brushing the damp earth. Hoofprints, fresh, sharp-edged, too many for a neighbor's casual visit. He followed them with his eyes toward the distant hills, every muscle tightening. The old instinct stirred. Years ago he'd learned to read ground like scripture, each print a verse of warning. 7 riders, maybe 8, heavy horses and a hurried pace. Not cowhands heading home. Trouble. He straightened slowly, lantern light catching the gray in his beard. The wind shifted, carrying the acrid tang of spent gunpowder. A shot fired far off, he guessed, but near enough to matter. His hand rested on the trough's rim, steady though his mind raced ahead. From the barn came the quiet nicker of his mare. She sensed it too. Caleb crossed the yard, boots silent on packed dirt, and lifted his Winchester from the wall. The rifle's worn stock fit his palm like a handshake from an old friend. He moved through the house without haste, setting the lantern on the table and checking each window. He pushed the small strongbox of coins beneath a loose floorboard, covered the opening with a rug, and took a long breath. No fear, only preparation, the way a soldier braces before dawn. A sudden knock startled the stillness. Caleb swung toward the door, rifle raised. The second knock came softer, hesitant. "Mr. Stroud," a woman's voice called. It's Clara Hart. Are you awake? He opened the door a cautious span. Clara stood there in the moonlight, a shawl drawn tight against the chill, her cheeks flushed from the ride. Her bay mare shifted restlessly behind her. "Evening, Clara," he said, lowering the rifle but not the caution in his eyes. "Something wrong?" "I wouldn't come so late, but," she bit her lip, glancing back at the dark fields. "My calf's sick. Won't stand. I thought you might have medicine or advice." Caleb studied her for a heartbeat. Clara Hart lived a mile east, a widow like himself, known for her quiet strength and the way she kept her land alive when most would have sold and fled. Her presence here at this hour was a twist of fate he hadn't expected. "Bring the animal water, keep it warm," he said. "I'll ride over before sunrise." "I'd be grateful," she answered, but her eyes lingered on the rifle in his hand. "You expecting someone?" He glanced toward the hills, where the night pressed heavy. "Tracks near my trough. Fresh. Too many." Her breath caught. "Outlaws." "Could be," he said. "Could be drifters. Either way, you shouldn't be alone on the trail." She shifted closer, voice dropping. "Then maybe I'll stay here till dawn." For a moment they stood in silence, two solitary souls bound by caution and the endless stretch of desert night. Caleb nodded toward the barn. "Horse'll be safe inside. There's coffee on the stove." Clara led her mare in, her movements brisk but eyes scanning the dark as if she too felt the distant tremor of danger. Inside the small house, the scent of strong coffee filled the air. She removed her shawl, the lantern glow catching the auburn strands of her hair. Caleb poured 2 cups, his hand steady though his mind ticked like a clock. "They'll come here?" she asked. "If they're the kind of men I think, they'll look for easy pickings." He set his cup down and checked the rifle's chamber. "But this place isn't easy." Clara watched him with a mix of fear and quiet admiration. "You speak like a soldier." He didn't answer. The past was a door he kept closed. The night deepened, every sound sharpened by the hush. Outside, the breeze stirred dry grass, and an owl called once before the silence swallowed it whole. Caleb stood by the window, scanning the ridge. His eyes caught movement, a faint flicker of shadow against the starlit sand, but when he looked again, nothing. Clara stepped beside him. "What if they come while we wait?" "Then we won't be surprised." She studied his profile, the set of his jaw, the calm that seemed carved from stone. "You don't fear them." "I fear wasting breath," he said. Minutes stretched then. The clock on the mantel ticked steady as a heartbeat. Clara sipped her coffee, hands tight around the mug for warmth. Caleb kept his gaze on the horizon, the old instincts alive now, sharp and sure. Far off, a low rumble reached their ears, a rolling tremor like thunder, but the sky remained clear. Clara turned, eyes wide. "Hoofbeats," Caleb said, his voice barely more than a breath. The sound grew, a dark rhythm carrying across the canyon. 7 riders, maybe 8, their approach masked by distance but undeniable. Boone's reckless shot had already split the night. Now the gang came to claim whatever the next hour would give them. Caleb tightened his grip on the Winchester, the metal cool and certain in his hands. Clara drew closer, her breath quick but steady. Outside, the desert waited, silent and endless, as the echo of approaching riders throbbed through the dark like a coming storm. The moon hung low and wide, a pale coin casting silver over the valley when the first hoofbeats reached Caleb's ears. He had been standing at the window for hours, the Winchester resting across his knees, the lantern dimmed to a soft glow. Clara slept in the barn's hayloft at his urging, wrapped in a blanket and hidden behind the smell of straw and horses. Now, as the sound grew distinct, 3 riders, maybe 4, he rose without haste and set the rifle within easy reach of the door. The night carried their approach long before the figures emerged from the mesquite. Shadows resolved into men and horses, the beasts blowing clouds of steam in the cold air. 3 of them. Their laughter preceded them, ragged and sharp, the smell of whiskey riding the breeze. Caleb stepped outside, the chill seizing his breath but not his resolve. The lead rider, a lean man with a wolfish grin, swung down first. His boots struck the earth like a challenge. "Evenin', rancher," he called, voice slick as oil. "We heard you might have a bite to eat and a sip of something strong." Caleb let the silence stretch before answering. "I keep food for myself," he said, his tone even. "No whiskey here." The second man dismounted, broad-shouldered, eyes glinting beneath the brim of his hat. A shotgun rested casually in his grip, but his finger tapped the trigger guard like a nervous habit. That's so. Shame. Been a long ride. The third stayed astride his horse, scanning the yard with restless eyes. Gold glimmered faintly where moonlight touched the bulge of his saddlebag. Caleb noted it, just as he noted the way the lead man's holster strap was loosened for a fast draw and the faint tremor in the shotgun wielder's left hand. Years of soldiering had trained him to read men the way others read tracks in sand. "You're welcome to water your horses," Caleb said, voice calm. "There's bread in the kitchen if you're hungry." The leader smirked, stepping closer. "That's mighty kind. Maybe we'll come in and share your table." "Kitchen's small," Caleb replied. "Best we keep to the porch." Something in his steady gaze slowed their advance. They exchanged quick looks, measuring the quiet men before them. The broad one chuckled, a sound that tried too hard to be light. "We don't aim to cause trouble, friend. We just had a profitable day." "Stagecoach profitable," the third man added, his words thick with liquor. He tugged the reins and grinned, teeth flashing in the moonlight. "Gold enough to drown in. Ain't that right, Boone?" The name hung in the air like a spark. The leader's grin faltered, eyes narrowing at the slip. "Shut your mouth," he snapped. The third outlaw bristled. "Why? He don't know us." "Maybe I do," Caleb said quietly. They turned toward him, the sudden stillness almost tangible. He let the words hang, not a boast but an observation, and held the leader's gaze until the men looked away with a scowl. The shotgun wielder shifted his weight, the tension in his shoulders sharp as a drawn bow. Caleb gestured toward the porch table where a loaf of bread waited beside a pot of cold beans. "Eat if you're hungry. Water for the horses is there." He nodded toward the trough, every movement deliberate, unhurried. The stillness of a patient marksman is louder than a gang's war cry, and though none of them knew the phrase, they felt its truth in the quiet pressure of his presence. The leader finally barked a laugh, though it sounded forced. "You got sand, old man. Most folks would be shaking in their boots with 3 armed visitors in the night." "Maybe I'm not most folks." They tore at the bread with greasy hands, muttering low insults and bragging in equal measure. Caleb watched from the doorway, every sense tuned to their fidgeting, their sideways glances, the twitch of fingers near triggers. The wind carried their whiskey breath and the metallic hint of stolen gold. Arguments flared again as quickly as the sparks from their spurs. The third man accused the leader of skimming the take. Voices rose, sharp and bitter, hands drifting to weapons. Caleb's thumb rested lightly on the Winchester's hammer, but he said nothing. His silence weighed heavier than any threat. "You shorted me," the third man hissed. "I counted." "You can't count past 10, the leader shot back. "Sit down before I help you to the ground." The shotgun wielder stepped between them, eyes darting to Caleb as if the rancher's steady calm embarrassed them. "Not here," he warned. "Not with him watching." The leader sneered but eased back, muttering curses. For a moment the night seemed to breathe again, the desert wind whispering through dry grass. Caleb met each of their eyes in turn. "You should move on before dawn. Soldiers will be after that stagecoach gold." The leader's grin returned, thin and dangerous. "And you should mind your tongue, rancher. Dawn's a long way off." They finished the bread in silence. When at last they turned to leave, the leader swung into the saddle and leaned forward with a cold smile. "We'll be back come morning. Might bring a few more friends. Could be we'll find that whiskey after all." Caleb said nothing. He stood in the doorway, rifle easy in his grip, watching as they rode into the silver dark. Hoofbeats faded across the canyon, but the promise of their return lingered like a storm cloud that refused to move. Inside the barn, Clara exhaled the breath she had held for an eternity. She pressed a hand to the rough beam, heart pounding in time with the receding thunder of hooves. In the house, Caleb set the Winchester on the table and closed the door with a quiet finality. The night grew still once more, but the air carried a warning as clear as the cold moonlight. This was only the beginning. The house lay wrapped in silence after the outlaw's departure, yet the night felt sharper than before, as if every grain of sand and blade of dry grass held its breath. Caleb set the bar across the door and rested the Winchester against the wall. The moonlight through the small window painted the floorboard silver. Across the room Clara emerged from the barn shadows, shawl clutched tight around her shoulders, eyes wide but steady. "They'll be back," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes." Caleb's answer carried no tremor. He poured her a cup of coffee gone cold. The steam long fled, but she took it with both hands as the warmth could still be coaxed from the cup. You don't even look afraid, she said after a long pause. Most men would be packing to run. He met her gaze, the gray of his eyes catching the lantern's low flame. Fear doesn't help him when shoot straight. That's not what I mean. She set the cup down and stepped closer, her voice pressing harder. I saw you watching them, reading them. You weren't just ready. You were measuring them like soldiers do. Caleb's jaw tightened. Outside, a coyote's cry trembled across the valley, long and lonely. War teaches habits that don't fade, he said at last. You fought, she asked. Long ago. Her brow furrowed, but she waited, patient as the desert itself. Caleb's fingers brushed the rifle stock, emotion half memory, half confession. They used to call me the Hawkeye of Shiloh, he said, the word sounding foreign after so many years. Union Army sharpshooter. I could hit a playing card at 500 yards. Clara blinked, the name carrying weight even she recognized. You're a legend. I heard stories when I was a girl. Legends are just ghosts with good aim. His voice thinned. I walked away when the war ended. Changed my name, buried the past. Why? She asked softly. Caleb's gaze drifted to the mantel where the small photograph of his wife caught the moonlight. Her smile, forever young, glimmered faintly behind the glass. Because the last time I raised a rifle outside of duty, a stray bullet found her. Crossfire between men chasing old grudges. I swore I'd never kill again. I came here to keep that promise. Clara followed his eyes to the picture and covered her mouth, grief echoing across the years between them. I'm so sorry. He nodded once, as if to close the subject, but the distant memory weighed on him heavier than any weapon. Tonight, he said, that vow may break. She touched his arm, fingers light but sure. To protect life isn't the same as taking it for pride or war. He looked at her, the quiet strength in her eyes like a lantern in the dark. I pray you're right. Outside, the night deepened, a black ocean beneath a sky of cold stars. Caleb moved with new purpose, the old soldier awakening fully. He checked the rifle sights with meticulous care, turning screws until they sat true. Powder and oil scented the room as he loaded cartridges, each click a steady heartbeat. Clara watched without flinching. Tell me what to do. You should stay hidden. I asked what to do, she repeated, firmer now. He studied her a moment, then nodded. Lanterns. We'll set them by the fence line and in the corral. Make them think we're spread wider than we are. If they ride in blind, it'll buy us seconds. Together they moved through the chill air. Clara carried lanterns while Caleb hauled stones from the edge of the field, stacking them in the sand where ricochet shots could find their mark. He showed her how to angle the light, so it threw long, deceptive shadows across the yard. The wind picked up, rattling the dry mesquite branches like bones. She held a lantern high, its glow trembling. Will you aim to kill them? I'll aim to stop them, he said. If they leave breathing, that's their choice. Her eyes glistened, but she nodded, gripping the handle tighter. Then I'll help you make sure we both live through it. They worked in silence broken only by the scrape of stone and the soft hiss of the lantern wicks. Caleb's mind drifted through old memories, fields of smoke and thunder, the weightless moment before a trigger break. Each memory pressed against the promise he had carried for years, the promise that had kept him human when ghosts of war tried to claim him. Inside again, he laid the rifle across the table and sighted through the narrow window. Every movement felt like a conversation with the men he used to be. He remembered the calm before a battle, how the world seemed to narrow until only the target remained. That calm settled over him now, cold and absolute. Clara knelt by the hearth, feeding the fire to a faint glow. They think you're just a quiet rancher, she said. They don't know. They will, Caleb murmured. But by then it'll be too late. She rose and stood beside him, the warmth of her presence a counterpaint to the chill creeping under the door. You don't have to face this alone. I've been alone a long time, he said. Not tonight. The words lingered in the room, steady as a vow of their own. Caleb adjusted the lantern so its light cast a shadow tall against the wall, a phantom sentinel to mislead the eye. He checked the rifle once more, then rested it across his knees, the steel glinting like moonlight on water. Outside, the wind carried distant sounds, perhaps the restless shifting of horses, perhaps only the imagination of him embracing for violence. The stars wheeled overhead, indifferent witnesses to what dawn might bring. Caleb breathed deep, the scent of oil and desert dust filling his lungs. He thought of his wife, of the promise whispered over her grave, and felt the weight of it pressing against his chest. Yet beneath that weight stirred another truth, as old as the land itself. Some vows bend when the innocent are threatened, and sometimes a man must become what he fears to keep others safe. He met Clara's eyes one last time before the long vigil began. "Whatever happens," he said, voice low and certain, "remember this isn't about revenge. It's about ending what they started." She nodded, her hand finding his, fingers warm and sure. "Then we'll end it." The house settled into silence, the kind that comes before a storm. Caleb listened to the night, every sense sharpened, the patient marksman once more, waiting for the inevitable return of the men who believed the valley held only an old rancher and a frightened widow. The horizon burned crimson as dawn crept over the mesas, a fierce, blood-red light that turned the valley into a vast furnace. Caleb crouched behind the low stone wall he'd built through the night, the Winchester balanced across his knees. Every lantern he and Clara had placed still flickered, throwing long, misleading shadows across the yard. The air smelled of mesquite smoke and cold iron, the taste of an inevitable reckoning. Hoofbeats thundered before the riders appeared, a deep, rolling drumbeat that made the earth tremble. 7 dark figures burst over the ridge, silhouettes against the rising sun. The Black Knoll gang rode hard, dust trailing them like a storm cloud, eyes set on the quiet ranch below. Their shouts broke the morning silence, harsh and confident, men who believed no one could stand in their way. Caleb's breath slowed. He pressed his cheek to the rifle stock and waited. When the gang crossed the dry creek bed, he raised 2 fingers to the sky, a signal only he would see, and pulled the hidden rope with his other hand. A heavy gate clanged shut, trapping their horses in a narrow funnel between corral and barn. Startled animals reared and whinnied, throwing the riders into confusion as a cloud of dust rose thick as smoke. Shots cracked the morning open. Caleb fired first, the Winchester's report sharp and final. A bullet smashed the rifle clean out of Boone's grasp, sending the young outlaw tumbling from the saddle with a cry of shock more than pain. Another quick shot shattered the stock of a shotgun aimed toward the house. The gang scattered, shouting, their bravado unraveling. "Spread out!" Fitch roared, but the dust betrayed them, turning every movement into a ghostly blur. Caleb shifted position silently, boots barely whispering on the packed earth. He fired again, striking a revolver from another man's hand, the weapon spinning into the dirt. He aimed not for hearts but for wrists, shoulders, the places that stopped a fight without ending a life. Years of discipline flowed through each precise motion. The patient marksman had returned, calm as stone. Bullets whined past him, slapping against boulders and splintering fence posts. Splinters stung his cheek. He rolled behind the wall and reloaded, every action measured, efficient. The sun climbed higher, bathing the chaos in harsh gold. A shadow moved along the barn's far side, one outlaw creeping low, trying to flank the house. Caleb pivoted, but before he could sight in, a sudden flare of light seared the corner of his vision. Clara stepped from behind the barn, shawl whipping in the wind, and hurled a burning lantern with perfect aim. Glass shattered against the ground, flames blooming in a startling burst. The outlaw flinched back, throwing an arm across his face. Caleb seized the moment, a single shot ringing out and striking the man's rifle, sending it spinning into the dust. "When justice rides the wind," Caleb murmured under his breath, "a single shot speaks for 100 prayers." The gang's confidence faltered. Boone scrambled to his feet, clutching his shoulder, eyes wide with disbelief. Fitch cursed and waved his men forward, but their charge faltered when another of Caleb's bullets sent a plume of sand erupting inches from their boots. Horses reared and screamed, nostrils flaring at the acrid smoke. The ranch became a storm of sound, hoofbeats pounding, men shouting, bullets slamming into rock. Yet through it all Caleb moved like water, his breath steady. Every shot a decision weighed and delivered. He shifted from wall to wagon, never lingering long enough for them to fix his position. Dust churned in the low light, masking him like a veil. Another outlaw made a desperate dash toward the porch. Caleb fired, striking the man's belt buckle and spinning him sideways with a cry. The attacker crawled away, clutching at torn leather, the fight draining from his limbs. Clara, hidden once more, watched with wide eyes but did not waver. Her courage steadied him more than any prayer. The gang's gunfire slowed, panic seeping into their voices. Fitch tried to rally them, but doubt gnawed at their bravado. "He's one man," he shouted, but the words sounded hollow against the echoing canyon. Caleb rose behind the wagon, silhouette framed by the burning sky. "One man's enough," he called back, voice carrying like a desert wind. Another shot cracked and Fitch's hat flew from his head, the bullet clipping the brim clean. He ducked with a startled curse. The riders broke. Boone stumbled toward his horse, mounting with a grunt of pain. Two others followed, spurring their animals hard toward the ridge. Fitch glared once more at the silent figure by the wagon, but when Caleb sighted down the barrel and held it steady, the outlaw yanked his reins and wheeled away. One by one, the Black Knoll gang fled into the brightening horizon, their legend unraveling in the wake of a single rancher's resolve. Dust swallowed them, leaving only the echo of hooves and the acrid smell of spent powder. Caleb lowered a Winchester, chest rising with a slow, deliberate breath. The morning sun broke fully over the mesas, casting long shadows across the yard littered with drop weapons and smoldering lantern glass. Clara emerged from the barn, face pale but eyes fierce, the flame of courage still burning bright. "They're gone," she said, her voice both relief and disbelief. "For now," Caleb answered, scanning the empty ridge. He felt the weight of the rifle in his hands, the familiar ache of a vow broken for the sake of life. The stillness after violence pressed around them, deep and ringing. Clara stepped closer, touching his arm lightly. "You saved us." Caleb looked toward the distant trail where the gang had vanished, dust already settling like a closing wound. "Saved who needed saving," he said quietly. The valley lay silent again, the red of dawn fading to gold, and the legend of the quiet rancher began to take root in the whispering wind.